You're listening to another episode of Mr. Allard's Neighborhood. This is the place where we're entitled to Brad's opinion. And now for your host, Brad Allard.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing out there, my vast listening audience? It's just a wonderful day. Today I have Seth Reeves, beloved teacher at Centennial. How long have you been at Centennial?
Since fall of 2012.
2012.
So coming up on 10 years.
And then you were there at BHS for quite some time, too.
6 years.
Yeah, right.
With a little gap in between.
Yeah, didn't you take a sabbatical to go pursue other interests, and then you came back and got on Centennial?
I moved to Nashville for 3 years.
That's what I thought.
Did music and songwriting and all that stuff. So.
And you just couldn't get away from the class.
I couldn't stop selling platinum records. I just got tired of it, you know. So.
Yeah, being on the road.
Yeah.
But many of y'all know Seth from his days at BHS as a student and as a teacher. Some of y'all may know him as Comrade. But no, we're going to have I'm sure, very lively but spirited debate on the gun situation here in this country. And we'll end up probably agreeing on some things and disagreeing on others or just whatnot. And it's the way it's supposed to be. Hopefully it's an enlightening conversation. I see he has notes, which intimidates me quite a bit. But I have my notes here, too. And I'll say... I was reading in Breitbart the other day. No, I don't say that kind of thing. Where do you get your information? Where'd you get a lot of yours?
Well, I mean, aside from following traditional media, legacy media, New York Times, Washington Post, whatever, Wall Street Journal, I honestly, a lot of the notes that I got come from a guy named Beau of the Fifth Column, who has a YouTube channel. He's kind of a left libertarian type commentator. He has some kind of interesting views on guns. He's not for full bans or anything like that. And then I follow a few more leftist commentary sites as well. Current Affairs, Jacobin Magazine.
Jacobin, yeah. I'm aware of. That is a little bit out there. It's definitely not your mainstream. Ooh, I got to get the sound down here. There you go. I do this every time. I get most of mine from. I kind of go left to right, literally. Times and Post, Wall Street Journal. Also, I get a lot of my stuff from National Review and occasionally the Daily Beast. You probably are familiar with that one.
Yeah.
It gives me a good overall view of things. The National Review, is very conservative, but it's not nearly as conservative as some of the far right stuff. That I don't bother with that. I mean, it's not just suspect, but I don't want to walk around in anger all day.
Yeah.
It's like when Limbaugh was around, I'd every now and then when the sports talk station would take a commercial, I'd drop in and see what Limbaugh was saying. And after 10 minutes, I'm like, give me a Democrat to kill. Where is he? Beat up some Democrat, you know?
Yeah.
You can't stand in that. They keep you in that constant state of rage, and it's not healthy for you.
Yeah.
And so it's not a good thing.
National Review tries a little bit to be less geared toward
they're very intellectual.
Overt outrage.
Yeah, they're very intellectual conservative. It's like what the New Republic used to be, not this grotesque thing that it is now. But I used to subscribe to New Republic when it was left of center, but thoughtful left of center. But now it's nothing. Anyway, I'm getting diverted. Here we're talking about our reading habits because I know that you're going through a graduate school right now, right?
That's right.
Yeah. How far along are you?
Just did one semester. I got another. I'm taking a class in July, second summer session class. So I'm only 6 hours into a 36-hour program.
Yeah.
So it'll take me about 3 years.
It took me about 5 because I was taking 3 hours of pop at UTA, and my son was born in the middle of that, and so I took a semester off. But I was fortunate to have my wife support this endeavor. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah. She encouraged me to do it.
Yeah,
So.
it's at Stephen F., right?
Stephen F., but online. So.
All online. You don't have to go to Nacogdoches at all.
I zoom in though. It's not.
No.
I do participate in the lectures in real time. So it's pretty nice.
That's how we have a DBU. So anyway, again, we're getting off topic. I need to talk about these sponsors and then get down to the matter at hand here. Thank you, Daniel, across at Burleson. He graduated, I think, about 3 years after you did, but Daniel Basin. Everybody knows Daniel Basin.
I know Daniel Basin.
And Amber, his wife, I think she came in about a year after him. So CrossFit Burleson, 317 Southwest Wilshire. Check out the workout regimen. check out the rates, check out the membership plans, times, the whole thing. 317 Southwest Wilshire, behind Stone Soup, if you're looking for it. Also, you graduated with this one, Shandy, right? Shandy Stoggsdale?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's in my class.
Mm-hmm. Right. Shandy Stoggsdale, she comes on here about once a quarter, talk about real estate. Now, really, she comes like you do, prepared. It's not just a bunch of stories, but she comes in and has data to back up what's going on in this town. And I guess anybody that lives in this town knows what's happening in real estate. So if you have a need to move into this town or a desire, then talk to her because she knows where the houses are before they come on market. Also, Rex Russell, the Russell Wealth Group, we graduated college together. That's how long we've been acquainted for quite a while. Check out myfinancialbox.com and help you the 401ks, your 403bs, whatever you got, retirement plans, whatnot. He's been doing it for a long time, 35 years here in the Johnson County area. So check out myfinancialbox.com, contact him, have some coffee, and you'll be good to go. And these next three are members of my networking group. I have Southern Gym. It's on the top of the Windmill Building. You ever taken Mrs. Reeves up there?
No, I've not.
Is she a jewelry type?
Not much.
Yeah,
no.
What I gather is she's into nature and outdoors.
Yeah, she's the president of Keep Burleson Beautiful.
Yeah, well, Southern Gym's very nice. Robin's working there right now for her this summer.
Okay.
And if and when Robin leaves Centennial, she'll hopefully be working there some more. Anyway, it's very nice. Nice inventory. It has repairs, it has designs, it has cleaning, the whole thing. You want appraisals, you name it, you got it. So go check it out. Also, another member friend of mine, Michelle Humphrey over at Hot Works. It's an infrared type workout. Pilates, rowing, biking, any type of physical exertion you can do with an infrared system, which maximizes the workout.
I officially got a membership.
Did you really?
It is not fun.
Well, it's not meant to be fun. Yeah. Hang on, I'm about to. There you go. A lot of dust today. Anyway, Hot Works is a very interesting place. I go visit the sponsors every now and then. I hold their hands, so beg them not to leave. And it's a very nice place, very secure place. So there you are. Also, Creative Concepts by Mandy. Creative Concepts does a lot of the promotional items. In fact, in about a week, I'm going to have some promotional stuff. Everybody's going to be lined up to get a Mr. Allard's Neighborhood coffee mug and stuff like that. So Creative Concepts by Mandy off 1187. So if you need some promotional items, there you are. She can do it, and she does a really good job. All right. Where should we begin? You name the call. Where would you like to start?
Well, I thought a lot about how this conversation might unfold. And I think one thing that is important to maybe start with, and I put it at the top of my list, is the difference between the is and the ought of the thing. Because it seems to me, and I think you'd probably agree, that given our pretty dysfunctional political system at the moment, the chance of major legislation passing through Congress is pretty remote.
It's zero, but
yeah. So, and there's hyperpartisanship and there's gridlock, and we all know how dysfunctional it is. So we can address the things that are more feasible within our current political reality, but I myself don't have a heart to stop there, because I do think we need to talk about the ought.
And that would be?
Well, what we think, if we did have a more functioning, healthy political system where there was a pretty good chance of some kind of moving the needle on this, on legislation, what would we want? What would really address this problem, rather than what sort of Band-Aids can we slap on it given the limitations we face,
Well, I would hasten to add one of those limitations is in the Constitution. Is that part of your modification idea?
Well, we both know that the implications of the Second Amendment are debatable in terms of what they allow, what kind of limitations. It does say well-regulated. That's part of the language, I don't know that this Second Amendment has a whole lot to tell us about ownership of high-powered semi-automatic rifles.
Well, see, okay, there I might have to respectfully disagree. You talk about the ought. Well, if you want to talk about modifying the Second Amendment through the amendment process, that's one avenue. But the idea of reinterpreting the Second Amendment, to me, is that slippery slope they always talk about. That if you want to reinterpret the Second Amendment. Say, well, they didn't really mean for you to have this type of gun. I just get really, really big red flags when they start talking about reinterpretation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want to change the Second Amendment, then there's a process in the Constitution that will allow you to do that.
Sure.
And it's difficult and it's incredibly hard. But if we're talking about what ought to happen, if you want to modify the Second Amendment to say that the states can regulate what kind of guns you have or something along those lines, okay. But if you say, well, the founding fathers never envisioned these high-powered weapons, well, I don't really, if you start talking about what the founding fathers really intended, then a whole lot of other Supreme Court interpretations would be at risk.
Well, that's precisely my point.
Yeah.
Is that I don't know how useful original intent is, and I don't think it's ever been that useful, for a number of reasons. But obviously, I'm not a strict constructionist. I think anytime you read something, you're interpreting it. I don't think there's such a thing, and this is somewhat from my background in philosophy and literature. But I don't think it's possible to say that there's a clear-cut objective meaning to any text. I think that there's every reading of a text is necessarily interpretive. But without getting too much in the weeds on that, I mean, I think we already are interpreting the Second Amendment to have limitations, because I don't think if you polled the majority of Americans and asked them, should a private citizen have the right to own a functioning surface-to-air missile system, I think most people would say no. And I think if you put it in terms of the Second Amendment, should the Second Amendment be construed so broadly as to allow such a right? I think most people would say that's crazy, for obvious reasons. There's no compelling reason for a private citizen to have the means to shoot down an aircraft or to have a main battle tank or a fighter jet or something like that. So I think already implicit in our understanding of the Second Amendment is an interpretation that it imposes a limit. We're just talking about taking that line, perhaps, and placing it elsewhere.
Okay, and where would you place that line?
Well, I mean, in the ideal, I don't know that there's any practical use for a private citizen to own a weapon that is expressly designed to kill a large number of human beings in a short span of time. I mean, that's what these guns are for. They're not for hunting deer. They weren't designed for hunting deer. They weren't designed for shooting beer cans or targets. You can use them for those things, certainly. But these kind of high-powered, high-velocity, rapid rate-of-fire semi-automatic arms, and full disclosure, I'm no gun expert, but I know that any kind of weapon that allows the massacre of children, like we saw in Uvalde, or any of the other, the Buffalo shooting recently, the Las Vegas shooting a few years ago, anything that allows that, I just don't see the practical need for anyone to have one. And so that, to me, that's a weapon of war. It's designed to kill a lot of people in a short span of time. Okay,
a couple things. We don't give our military men the type of guns that we're talking about here because they're not powerful enough. Actually, these AR-15s aren't really the best use of a hunting rifle either in most cases because, again, they're not as powerful as people think. But that's quibbling about the point. The point is that when you have a situation where you're defining an AR-15, it's like this broad category of guns that encompasses more than the weapon that you're envisioning with the Uvalde situation or the Buffalo situation. It's a very broad category. And people erroneously think AR is for assault rifle, which we know it's not.
It's for Armalite.
Right, yeah. And so it's a broad category. And it's a category that most people use for legitimate purposes. And you say, well, it kills a lot of human beings. So does a handgun with 6 rounds in it. You walk in with a couple of guns, and there's 12 potential victims. So the idea that this particular gun is the cause of a problem, I think the cause of the problem is different. It's mental health, other issues, as opposed to this gun is available, therefore. For example, what percentage of crimes do you think are committed by rifles of these type?
Well, I think what we're talking about is, though, I mean, I don't mean to dodge your question, but I think what we're talking about here is a very particular type of gun crime.
Okay, I
right?
get you.
we're talking about a very particular type of incident, you know, that we've seen them occur in schools, we've seen them occur in churches and synagogues, shopping malls, movie theaters, open-air concerts and festivals, grocery stores. We've seen them in all of these cases, and I think there's a difference between a mass shooting event. I mean, you know, obviously, yeah, a handgun can be used to kill people, and I'm not for banning handguns. I'm a huge proponent of concealed carry licenses for handguns. I'm fine with that.
Really? I didn't want to make any assumptions about how you felt about guns in general.
I mean, I'm not for banning all guns or anything.
Just this particular type.
I think a gun, you know, I mean, look, I mean, to not get too graphic, but you know, the doctors and the medical examiners that were at the crime scene in Uvalde have talked about how the only way to identify the murdered children was they couldn't identify them by sight. This gun ripped them apart. I mean, there's a big difference. You know, if you lose a loved one to handgun crime, you know, they're mugged and they're shot in the street or something, or a home invasion or whatever. I mean, that they're still just as gone, and it's, you know, still just as horrible and tragic. But I think we're talking about trying to address a very particular kind of incident.
Well, and I guess another reason I get a little bit leery about restrictions on these kind of guns is that almost all the laws are focusing on law-abiding citizens and making it harder for them. Okay. Second of all, and we'll probably talk about this when we get to it, the multiple failures of law enforcement, not just in Uvalde, but, you know, in Buffalo, that young man was obviously mentally disturbed, but no one did anything about it. The shooter in Parkland High School, or was it Plantation High School? That's right. In Plantation, Florida. I'll get it right. Or down in Santa Fe, down south of here. In all those cases, it was a failure of law enforcement. And so what the law, like they passed yesterday in the House, which has no chance in the Senate, focuses on my ability to get a gun, not that Uvalde shooter. And that's one of my problems. And another problem is that the AR-15, like I said, they call it a military style weapon, which is not the same thing as a military weapon. It's designed to look like one, I guess, for, you know, aesthetic appeal, or maybe whatever else. I just get very concerned when we take this broad categories of guns off the shelf, out of the hands, and I'm going to be the one without the AR-15, not the guy breaking in my house, because he'll get one.
Well, I don't know that that's necessarily true. I mean, and if we're talking about, I mean, home invasions, I think you know, a shotgun's what you need to be defending yourself with. But I mean, if we're talking about these mass shooting incidents at a school, I mean, the Uvalde shooter wanted that AR-15 when he was 17. He tried to get, I think it was his sister, to buy it for him. She refused. You know, he bought it the day after he turned 18. So there's an example of he wanted that gun before it was legal for him to get it. So in that sense, such as the law was crafted, it did prevent him from buying it. It prevented him from having access to it. The Buffalo shooter from a couple of weeks ago, who's you know, he published his manifesto. He's an avowed white supremacist. In his manifesto, he talked about addressing his fellow white supremacists, violent extremists. He said, after this incident happens, there's going to be a push for further gun control. He said, you, my brethren, you need to resist it at all possible. He talked about the things that the items that he wanted to acquire. He was in New York State. He said, I couldn't get it in New York. I couldn't get this. I couldn't get this kind of magazine. I couldn't get this. They're going to push to restrict things further. You need to resist this at all costs. So even the shooter who's perpetrating these events knows that there is some validity to some of these measures, and he's advising his fellow extremists to resist them. So I think the idea that there's no policy solution here, there's no legislative solution, I think I don't think that's true. You know, we're talking about, to go back to the is and ought, you know, I mean, there's not going to be, in our current political situation, there's not going to be a ban on the weapons. I would say if there was, one of the big problems with the 1994 assault weapons ban was that it focused more on the aesthetics or the cosmetics of the weapon. I would want to see a ban crafted very carefully for technical specifications. I would want to see it address things like muzzle velocity. I would want to see it to address things like rate of fire, magazine capacity, the things that actually make it a particularly well-suited instrument for carrying out mass slaughter.
Well, but I guess what I keep coming back to is that the people that are bound and determined to do what we're talking about now are going to have that ability to get that weapon. I mean, we're swimming in illegal guns, and so I can't get that AR-15, but that Uvalde shooter, if he was that desperate to do what he did, he would find one. They would, and so what you really have to do is ban the manufacture of those guns. And then,
fine with that. There's 393 million of them already. 393 million guns in the United States. I don't really see that. There's not a need to produce a new firearm in this country. We could ban them. This is totally hypothetical. We could say, let's put a moratorium on the manufacture of new guns, and nobody would hurt for trying to get a gun in this country.
Well, but you'd be having people go around the system. And that's another thing we can talk about is just how poorly run this system is. But I think most people, 99% of these people that own AR-15s, use them legitimately. Now you say, well, that 1% ends up in a Uvalde situation. To me, I think the guns are more of an expression of American culture of violence than they are for anything else. I mean, if we didn't have those guns, that guy would have walked in there with a machete.
He wouldn't have been able to kill 19 children and 2 teachers.
Well, maybe, you never know. With that way the Uvalde police reacted.
I mean, there's a reason why they go for these kind of guns. I mean, that's my point.
I got you. I'm not trying to be obtuse. I know what you're saying.
I go back to the fact that those guns are designed with high velocity and a high rate of fire. I mean, they're ideally and expressly designed to murder a lot of people very quickly. The Port Arthur shooting in Australia,
which
resulted...
No, I got to stop you. So you say it's designed like the manufacturer. That's their intent to kill a lot of people.
No, I don't mean that.
Right.
I don't mean, Remington or whoever makes these guns is designing them, hoping people go out and murder people with them. I don't mean to impute that, but I mean that is the facts of the functionality. That's what it does, right? That's what it's for, right? And if you look at the case in Australia is interesting because in 1996 they had a shooting in Port Arthur, Tasmania, and that resulted in them banning semi-automatic rifles in Australia, and they also coupled that with a gun buyback program, which I think is a really good idea since, as you mentioned before, we talked about this 393 million guns, a voluntary buyback program. A voluntary buyback program, and theirs was voluntary.
Okay.
Theirs was voluntary.
Okay.
And they offered an above-market price, and a lot of people did end up selling their guns back to the Australian government. But they haven't had a mass shooting incident like that since. The shooter at the Port Arthur incident was able to kill 12 people in 15 seconds with the kind of gun he had. He had a AR style gun. He was able to kill 12 people in 15 seconds. The Las Vegas shooter from a few years ago was able to murder, how many people was it, in 10 minutes?
Yes.
60 some people or something?
Something like that.
In 10 minutes. And of course he had positioned himself strategically well to do such a thing. When we talk about these kind of bans, I think we need to realize that when we're legislating to address a problem, when we're legislating for some kind of prohibition, there is always going to be a chink in that armor. As you noted, there's always going to be some kind of workaround. But the fact is, laws like that do make it harder to get a hold of the contraband product. And they do make it, a lot of times it makes it not worth someone's effort.
Well,
you have to be very, very determined, and that does cut down on the likelihood they'll happen, and it cuts down on their frequency.
Well, let's see. I have a comment here. Antonio Basalo was talking about, some of the African atrocities, without much guns. They would use machetes and whatever. That's what the whole Rwanda thing about 20 years or 30 years ago, rather, was about. But see,
that's an incident of mass mob violence. So, I mean, it's a different. That's apples and oranges to me.
Well, here's the thing: is that prohibitions like you're talking about worked. Every other prohibition we've ever tried on any subject has failed, or we wouldn't have fentanyl in our streets. and because people are going to get what they're going to get. And I just think that these laws, first of all, we have a whole raft of laws on the books about that could have prevented at least the buffalo thing. Uvalde may be a unique episode because there was no record there. And to me, when we talk about red flag laws in a little bit, that's where the failure is that this kid was known to be mentally unbalanced and no one did anything about it. And so because of him, the vast majority of legal gun owners are going to be put through a great deal more difficulty in getting guns, for not just for hunting, but or for self-protection, any reason they care to. And so, that's where I guess I get where when you talk about banning these AR-15s, again, that's a very broad category. My problem is I may not get one, but the guy that we're talking about will. Now you say we'll make it more difficult. We'd like to think so, but then again, we're not enforcing the laws now to make it more difficult. And that's a whole other story. It's very difficult to get a gun if you really do follow the law. But there's so many episodes of bureaucratic incompetence and also lack of prosecution. But maybe on the other side of that commercial, we can talk about that specifically. But to boil it down, if you had the ability, you would take the AR-15s off the shelves.
Well,
what about the ones that people already own?
Yeah, I think that there's a place for the gun buyback to try it, to give a good faith effort, right? And there's been some success with that, like in Australia. We're talking about ideal, right? Obviously, this isn't going to happen in our current political reality, and I don't think you and I are going to really see eye to eye on the ban notion. I will say that a lot of times the talking point about that is, the very, very pro Second Amendment or pro gun crowd will say things like, you can't define what a weapon of war is and so on, or, there's this sort of gatekeeping on the discourse. If you're not able to talk in great detail about the technical aspects of guns, then you don't have a right to have an opinion, which I think is kind of really bad faith because we're all potential targets. We know that now. Anywhere we go out in public, it's the likelihood an individual is going to get hurt in one of these incidents is low, but nonetheless, we now know there's nowhere safe, potentially, right? So we all have the right to voice an opinion on it. But I would say, if you ask somebody why they need an AR-15 who's very, very staunchly pro these kinds of weapons and the pro-maximalist interpretation of the Second Amendment, they'll often respond with, well, it's not a weapon of war. Well, I say, what do you need it for? When you press them, they'll say, well, in case we need to fight the government. Right, and that's a lot of times, and okay, I get that. Like you want to be able to protect against government tyranny, but to me that gives the game away. Because if you think that at a certain point the government could become tyrannical enough to justify an armed rebellion against it, then you're wanting to give yourself a chance against armed agents of the state. You're talking about killing cops and soldiers is what you're talking about in that situation. And you're talking about a weapon of war that gives you a fighting chance against government forces that are going to be using weapons of war. So a lot of times, I think these folks know these are well suited. These kind of weapons that they want to remain in private hands are well suited to military theaters of war. So, that's why I'm ultimately for, I just don't see the need for a person to have one. Certainly not, I don't think the right to own that kind of thing trumps the right of children to go to school in safety or to go to the grocery store in safety.
We can talk about school safety as well, I think,
But beyond that, like, there are some other things that I think need to happen beyond a ban, since we've established that's not going to happen. And that's where we might find some more common ground.
Right. Yeah. When you mentioned this, guy, fictional guy, or not fictional because they do exist, hard Second Amendment interpretation because they want to fight the government one day. That kind of makes me uncomfortable. However, when I say I don't trust the government, it's not so much I have this vision of the ATF kicking my door down with jackbooted thugs. What I see is just them eroding away from my rights a little by little into a situation that we are in a passive situation, that there won't be any armed rebellion against the government because we don't have any arms. But I'm just saying that I it's not so much when I say I distrust the government. It's not because I think they're planning to conquer this country and drive it into fascism or something like that. But I don't trust the government to be competent. I don't think they'll act in good faith. I don't trust the government. I don't want Nancy Pelosi dictating my rights no more than you would want Ted Cruz. You know where I'm coming from? That's it. So I'm not saying we need to have a bunch of weapons of war as you describe them, you know, in case, you know, the ATF comes knocking down the door. But I don't trust the government to look after my rights or protect my rights. And I surely don't think they're going to protect me in all situations of physical danger.
Well, curiously enough, I kind of agree with you on that. I mean, I don't just think because they're the government, you should trust them, or because they're the government, they're necessarily going to do what ideally they should do, which is protect individual rights and liberties, like, and, you know, promote general welfare and all the nice words in the preamble to the Constitution. I don't think just because those words are on paper that means the government's going to do those things. So, you know, I'm kind of with you on that. I understand that hesitation to put your faith in that institution. So.
And I appreciate that because I don't envision myself hunkered down in some bunker, like waiting for the government to come down in tanks. But what I do see is kind of what happened in some of the fascist countries in Europe in the 20th century, where they just took this one away, took this one away, took this one away. One of the first things they always do is take away guns. I mentioned this on the show. I mentioned before, one of the very first laws that the Southern governments did when they regained their control of their governments in Reconstruction was they took away gun rights for the blacks. Why? Because they didn't want to be shot.
Right. They were afraid. They were afraid of retribution.
Right.
And I think, you know, understandably.
Yeah, right. I mean,
what they had subjected black people to.
Sure.
You know?
And they want to be able to, terrorize them with the Klan and not worry about getting shot at. And but that's what I'm talking about with is that it wasn't, it just those kind of rights were being taken away. And then when you say, well, do you need an AR-15 for that kind of right? If we start defining what kind of gun you need to have to defend your rights, then we're just going right down that hillside, and we're going to have, whoever's running Congress at the time dictate those rights. And that's why I think you need to have a stable basis of gun rights, which we find in the Second Amendment. Now, again, if you want to go through that process of amending, and I know it's pretty much impossible to amend that Constitution. I can't imagine 38 states.
No, it's never going to happen again, I don't think.
Well, it'll be very difficult, but I'll let you have the last word on this before we go to the commercials. Anyway, the second round. Anyway, I understand what you're saying. I think most gun owners understand what you're saying. That AR-15 can be used in a Uvalde type incident in a way that leads to these kind of tragedies. But we are talking about that incident versus the millions of people who own that type of gun, who use it appropriately, own it appropriately, and take the precautions appropriately. So they would say that one guy or the guy in Buffalo shouldn't be able to cause a situation that takes away my rights. Now, but I'll let you respond to that, and then we'll do the ads.
Well, I mean, I just don't subscribe to the idea that a right like that is absolute. And I don't think it exists in isolation. It's always in balance and in trade-offs with other rights, like the right to go to a public space and not get murdered. I think that's the other part of the rights that we don't often talk about, unfortunately. This gets framed in terms of this is my right to own this kind of weapon, so on and so forth. But, are
they working next door? Oh, no, it was his camera.
Oh, no.
I thought they were working. Okay, we had a little camera glitch, but it will be all right.
Just doing a good jackhammer impression.
Yeah, really, I thought they're working across the hall. I thought that's what the noise was. But anyway, finish your thought. And then
Well, I just think that, whenever, like I said, I go back to my example, like nobody really is going to seriously argue that I have the right to have a surface-to-air missile system, and some wacko extremists could make the point, well, the government will come after you with drones or fighter jets, so you need to protect I mean, yeah, okay, right. I guess, but, it's just not, there's no compelling need for a person to do that, and the chance for someone to commit a lot of terrible mischief with it is very high, and I tend to lump a gun expressly designed to kill people, like in the fashion that it does in that category.
But you say it's designed to kill people. It's like any other tool. In a sense, it wasn't designed to kill people. It was designed for hunting and self-protection, and if people misuse that.
No, the guns are designed to kill people. That's what they've been designed to take life. I mean, a gun is a tool designed to take life. Well, whether of a person or an animal, ever since the first firearm was invented, they're designed to kill.
Okay.
So.
All right. Well, I want to talk about the second round, and then we'll go. I like to go and talk about red flags and mental health issues as well, because as far as the bans and whatnot, like you said, legislatively, that's probably a non-starter.
It's dead in the water.
I'm not. I guess I'm not as far away from what you're thinking, but I just know I know people in my life in which an AR-15. When I say it's necessary, they don't live near law enforcement. They don't live near access to law enforcement very easily, and they need some sort of protective measure. And sometimes that kind of gun is what you need. I have several relatives that live out in the country, and they're 40 minutes away from law enforcement. And, here in Johnson County, they do a great job, but there are only a few of them, the deputies. So anyway, you and I won't solve the gun ban situation.
No, I don't think so.
But there are other things I think we're more in tune with, and that is school security and mental health issues. Also, so let's talk about these. Otto at our place. You ever go to our place?
I haven't been there.
You ought to go. It's really nice. I was there today. And I'll be there tomorrow too.
And they're the place that's only open for breakfast and lunch, right?
Right. They're open from 6 to 3.
Okay.
And it's right off the highway, and Allsbury and Otto, probably more along than your line of thinking than mine, but he's a good man.
Yeah.
And he's very good to the community. And I'm very pleased to have him as a sponsor. And I'll see him tomorrow, like I said, because he's always walking around like, the maitre d'. You call him Frank Sinatra. Also, somebody probably from school, Chris Notaboom at Wild Cigar and Culture.
Yeah, a friend just told me about this place. I wasn't aware of it.
You need to go there because you strike me as somebody that would appreciate something decent, a decent drink or decent cigar. I can't imagine you sitting around the house in a T-shirt drinking a Coors Light. That's not your thing.
Well, I actually don't drink anymore, but when I did, no, I didn't slam Coors Light much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they also have non-alcoholic stuff, but a lot of people go there just for the cigars and do business there and stuff like that. They usually play jazz or light rock and whatnot. He's got this big tiki party coming up, I believe tomorrow night. I had to find out what tiki is, some sort of Polynesian theme, I guess, but there you are. But it's a good place, and I've been there about 3 or 4 times. My son-in-law loves cigars, so there you are. Also, Proactive Payment Solutions. This is another Burleson Next student, Antonio Basalo, who's commented on the show earlier. He graduated about 13 years after you did. He does point of sales operations and online business relations and transacting business online. If you have particularly if you have a mobile business, you can do a lot of POS situation, those point of sales operations and get you the best rates and the best deals. He's a really fine man. I had him on about 6 weeks ago. He's a very interesting immigration story. He was brought here as a small child and found out when he was trying to join the Navy. Oops. And so he's a dreamer.
Oh, he found out he didn't have citizenship, and he was under the impression he did? Okay.
I'm sure we'd have a nice discussion on immigration issues as well.
Yeah. Probably so.
Well, maybe we got to do that because I like, to be honest, I like having discussions that have some counterpoint because I think the people enjoy the show better, and it's more engaging to them than me just ranting. But anyway, I can rant about Biden anytime. I bet you can too.
Oh, I certainly can. I'm not a fan. So.
Yeah, it's funny because I told people, said, well, he must be a big Biden fan. I said, oh no. Yeah, this morning we were talking to my friends at the Sunday school table, at the breakfast table at our place. And I said, you were coming on. I said, oh, he must be a big Biden fan. And I said, oh, no.
No. Although we're criticizing him from different directions.
Yes, exactly right.
I'm criticizing him very sharply from the left. So
that's good, though.
And people that think Biden is a leftist, no, he's not a leftist.
Yeah,
no.
My son kind of goes along those lines, too. He's not a fan either, but we have different reasons. Anyway, tomorrow, big show tomorrow. Tiffany Griffin will be on. I'll probably promote this at the end. Tiffany Griffin's going to be on, talk about local life. She'll have her latest magazine, and she's going to be talking about a few things that are going on this week. Local Life magazine is probably one of the primary sources of advertisement in this area. 30,000 homes, over 111,000, 112,000 people view this thing. I see it in a lot of stores, doctors' offices, whatever else. And she'll be on tomorrow and talk about the magazine, and we're going to talk about some other things, so y'all can tune in as well. Do we have one more? Yes. Do you know about the free health clinic we have here? here in Burleson.
No, I had no idea.
Yeah, it's on Haskew Street behind the QT and all that. It's on the northeast corner of the Baptist Church parking lot. Pathway and First Baptist have put together, along with this charity physicians network, free health services for those without insurance. It's not Medicaid, or they have services as they are, but these are working people that don't have insurance, and they're open 5 days a week. Now they're not open for everything 5 days a week. I always stress this, like if you have a pediatric situation, there's a day or two for that. If you need OBGYN type stuff, there's a day for that. And because these doctors are donating their time, they don't work for the clinic. They come in on their time. They're either retired doctors or whatnot, or they have the time to donate a day a week to this kind of thing. And it's really it's a great thing. And we've been needing something like that for a long time. And I'm going to have a couple of their folks on probably in about 2 weeks. That they're still trying to get it all together. But anyway, so if you don't have insurance, there's that, at least there's that outlet. And they have examination rooms, and they have a teledoc room and all this other business. So it's really great. Anyway, let's talk about, speaking of health, my biggest problem with the Uvalde situation and with the Buffalo situation is that there were people in these young men's lives that knew about the mental disabilities of their or mental problems. I don't want to say disabilities. That's not the appropriate way to look at it. Mental problems that these boys had. And they didn't say anything about it. Or if they did, they didn't say it to the right people. And so it really drives me crazy when we see one of these episodes where some young man does what he does, and all the parents or the parent or guardian go, "My stars, I never saw this coming." Whereas all the kids knew. We're not surprised. They called that Uvalde kid, the Ramos kid, school shooter, because he'd been talking like this for 2 or 3 years. And he would go around town and shoot people with BB guns, and he would, mutilate cats and, weird stuff. Same thing with that kid in Buffalo. That's what gets to me.
There are often signs.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we may have some agreement. I think there can be various forms of red flag laws that do flag these things. I think domestic violence is also, there's extremely strong evidence that there's a meaningful correlation between DV incidents and people who end up doing these sorts of things. And that's not to say everybody who is guilty of domestic violence is going to commit a mass shooting.
No,
but many, many, many mass shooters have either violence against animals or violence against a domestic partner. So I think these are the kind of things that we could craft legislation for. They aren't banning a weapon. They aren't focused on the weapon. And they're behavior-based, or they're, and I think that kind of thing could get some traction.
Here's the thing also is that we already have laws in the books that if they had created some sort of criminal incident, they're supposed to be banned from a gun if it's of a certain stature. Now, if you got picked up for shoplifting at Walmart, that's not going to be a deal. But if you had a domestic violence episode in your past, even if it's a misdemeanor, there should be some, hesitation. And if it's a felony, forget it.
Well, let me ask you a question, and this is a legitimate, honest question, because I don't know. Do you know if there is this federal or state? Because to me, if it's not federal, it needs to be federal so that it applies everywhere equally. If there's a DV prohibition, or if there's cruelty to animal prohibition, there doesn't need to be a patchwork on this.
Okay. One of my articles talks about all the restrictions one is placed under nationally. If you had a gun or wanted a gun, I'm trying to find the one exactly. That's not that. I'll go to the next page. They're talking about law enforcement and all this other business. They're talking about the numerous times difficulties it takes to get a gun is surprising. Okay. I'm trying to find it exactly, but in effect, if you had any of these type of incidents, you should be banned. According to the law, okay? That's where all this laws fall down, because here's another law that's not commonly reported and or prosecuted is lying on the form about your status. That is a felony. And one of the data points that really struck me is last time we have good data on this was about 4 years ago. There was about 12,700 cases of people lying on the form, which means they should be automatically ineligible for it. How many of those actually were prosecuted?
Right.
12.
Right.
It was literally 12 out of 12,700. And then you have the U.S. Attorney of Chicago, Northern Illinois, but he has Chicago, and he says publicly, we are not going to prosecute illegal gun buys, straw buys, as they call them, where you buy them for somebody else. All these things are already illegal, but even prior, what you're asking is what would prevent somebody from getting a gun. It is a federal situation, the Brady Bill and variations of it. Some states have even more. You can add more to it.
Right, at the state level.
Yeah.
I think anything we would talk about here to add either another kind of prohibition on red flags of some sort.
Here it is what I'm talking about.
Needs to be federal.
It is federal because if you're buying it from a licensed dealer, it's a federal license, not a state one.
Right.
And, and here's the thing is only about maybe, I had the data here in front of me, only about less than 3% of the crimes that are committed are bought through retail outlets or even through, gun show purchases. I mean, it's very, very small percentage. But it talks about if you've been a drug addict or a legal user of drugs, if you are not here legally, if you have been judged mentally deficient by a court of law or committed to an institution, if you're subject to a restraining order, if you committed a misdemeanor that would have resulted in at least 1 year in jail, regardless of what the sentence was you got. Of course, the felony convictions, if there's an active arrest warrant, if you're a fugitive from a warrant, all these things ban it. So there's a lot of restrictions to getting a gun the appropriate way already. But all this falls apart if A, we're not enforcing it, and B, if people in these lives of these boys, and they're almost always boys. I can't think of a mass shooting.
No, they're almost universally men.
Yeah.
Or boys.
Yeah. All that falls apart if mom and or dad or grandma, whoever it is, doesn't avail herself to the appropriate authorities that my grandson needs help. He's making these threats. And then you and I both, in all our experiences in high school, know that kids, what's the worst crime a kid can commit? Is snitching, right? They need to get over that. If they see somebody posting on Facebook, I want to do these terrible things, they can't sit by and say nothing. But they do. They did in Uvalde.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few other things I think that could happen here. I mean, we can talk about culture and we can talk about mental health. The thing that I have a problem with the mental health angle are two. One is that, and this gets back to the thing we're not going to agree on about semi-automatic assault weapons and so forth. Other countries have people with mental illnesses and mental health issues and so on, and the common denominator is not that, or that is the common denominator, but they don't have the easy access to these powerful weapons. But if we're going to have a serious conversation about mental health care in this country, we need to do more than lip service. And there are a lot of liberals and there are a lot of leftists that when they hear conservatives talk about mental health in the wake of these terrible massacres, we look at that and we go, that's just your dodge. And with some reason, because conservatives, generally speaking, I don't mean to step on too many toes here, but there isn't,
say what you want.
There isn't a lot of support for robustly funding these kind of public health programs.
And you're exactly right.
And so it's like, this is just a talking point for you to dodge talking about the problem with the gun. You want to blame something else. And so, but it's like Senator Cruz or whoever, it's like, what are you actually going to do to provide better mental health services, better access, publicly fund this and so forth? So, I mean, to me, I think, that it may be one thing for a parent or a grandparent or a friend or whomever to say, my son is troubled, my son is exhibiting all these warning signs, but then knowing, okay, I can get my son an appointment with a mental health professional, and it's not going to cost an arm and a leg, and we're going to be able to get my son the help he needs. That's, to me, the gap too.
Well, you said almost exactly what I said 2 weeks ago when I did a monologue on Uvalde. I said at the end of that show, exactly what you said. You can't, as conservatives or Republicans, say, well, it's a mental health issue and blame grandma, and that's the end of it. I said grandma needs to know where to go, and she needs to know not just where to go, that it is available. And we can't be constantly at a state level be looking ways to trim property taxes and then fund this is what this is more of a priority than making sure they shave off 2 cents off a property value tax.
Yeah.
This is, we got to place a much higher priority on
We got to pay
safety.
for it as a society.
You're right. And I said the same thing about school safety. If we want to put a cop in every school or a resource officer, it's going to cost money. And I think it's worth it. But I don't want to hear all this belly aching about property taxes in schools because, we gotta look at the priorities. And it's obvious that when you have this way of saying, well, it's that troubled boy in Uvalde, and then you vote down the kind of measures that would have maybe made it possible to take that guy out of the system. Mental health, get him some treatment, put him in an institution for a little while if you need to, whatever. And then, if you don't fund that, then you're being hypocritical.
Yeah.
So that we
It's
absolutely
just a
agree on.
talking point, right?
Well, it is a dodge because they can say it's grandma's fault, but okay, she may have some culpability that she didn't say anything to anybody, but where would they have gone in Uvalde for that?
Right. And the other thing to me is it also needs to, we all know economically, for the average person, we're not doing great in this country right now for a lot of reasons. And, and it's been that way even before this spike in inflation hit everywhere. But you also need to know that if you need to get your son treated, if you need that, you need to know it's going to be taken care of. Because if you throw up another barrier, well, this is going to cost an arm and a leg, and I'm already struggling to make ends meet. You've got this desperation out there that has to be addressed.
Yes, and a lot of these young men are probably ignored at home for various numbers of reasons. Maybe they're working 2 jobs, the parents are, or maybe they're just negligent parents, and on and on and on. But, we need to have mental facilities available. I would like it if at the secondary level at BISD, we had not just counselors that help you with your schedule, but licensed medical professional type counselors.
We do.
But doesn't he go, or she? It was a guy when I was last there.
No, I mean there is a counselor now that is
on the staff specifically
for mental and emotional health and support.
Just for Centennial.
There's a dedicated counselor.
I thought that was somebody that just traveled around.
No, we have a full time. Okay. Now I think we could probably use more than one. Honestly, I mean, given the size of the student body, you might think about increasing the number of staff, mental health staff.
I'm glad to hear BISD's picked it up on that, because when I left, it was somebody that traveled to the different schools. So, but it's but then again, you're talking about a large need. Maybe I don't know if you have enough professionals available, but I just really think that what you hit it spot on is that when they talk about mental health, and okay, pony up.
Yeah.
If you're going to talk about this thing and say we need to improve our mental health capabilities for these young men, then show me the money. And if not, take a hike. Because I know, I'm not a big fan of Ted Cruz because he does this a lot. And a couple other senators are like, well, we need to change society, but I'm not going to put any money into it.
I mean, you can't just throw money at a problem, but the truth is that any really good solution to any of these problems is going to cost money.
Right.
You have to think about how you're going to spend it. You have to be strategic, of course, but you can't just wish it into existence.
Right. That's exactly right. I mean, that he say money doesn't solve your problems. Well, it sure solves some of them.
Yeah.
And they talk about like in the schools, and that's a whole other topic. Sometimes money is wasted, but sometimes it's necessary. But again, to go back to this point, we should at the state level be more concerned about this when we are about, Dan Patrick's latest crusade.
Yeah.
And that's what drives me nuts about it. I love Texas and I love the culture, but sometimes the politics drives me insane.
Yeah. I mean, and, I think the other thing that we might think about is just, there's sometimes this talking point also gets bandied about, let's say, a culture of violence, like violent video games are part of the problem. The research doesn't really show that violent video games contribute to this that I've seen, but there is a gamer culture that is very problematic. And these are young men who are online all the time in online gaming platforms. And I don't know if you know how this works, but they're able to talk. There's a community. It's not just...
I'm aware of it, even my age, but it's not something I've ever experience, but I know what you're talking about.
They're not just playing the game; they're
Right.
also talking. They're commenting back and forth. They develop this. There is this community, and there are a lot of these people that commit these violent acts. These young men. There's a significant number of them that are plugged into that subculture, and that is a subculture where people do tend to get radicalized toward very extremist ideologies, typically very far-right ideologies, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, all these things, the kind of misogyny we see some of these mass shooters espousing, right, where they hate women because they don't have success in the dating scene or what have you.
Right.
And I think, to some degree we have to think about, what kind of society we create. Do we create a society where people do have a sense of meaningful opportunity? Do we create a society where people do have access to health care that they can afford, including mental health care, but also physical health care? Do we have a society where people are getting a living wage for putting in hard work? Or do we have a society where more and more people, despite their best efforts, are falling farther and farther behind?
That's a whole nother topic there.
It's a big topic, but I think you can't divorce that from some of these issues.
No, it's all
and we
connected.
can't get too much into that now.
Yeah.
But I do think that, this is all connected.
Well, it kind of, we're running close on time, but I do want to get into this last point. If we had this mental health system that we're talking about, where there's much more access, and they encounter some young man with obvious mental instability, should they be reported to on a red flag system is where I'm getting at. Are you a proponent of the red flag idea? 19 states and D.C. have it. There's not a national one. Well, they passed one yesterday in the House, which is going nowhere.
Right.
We don't have one in Texas, but New York has one, and it failed totally. A year before this happened in Buffalo, the police talked to this kid, and about his postings and his odd behavior in school, and they went away, and that was it. And then he buys a gun right after he turns 18, and obviously we know what happened next.
Right.
And so, but anyway, so red flags are not necessarily the answer if they're not going to be used right. But let's say we have a red flag system. As an educator, do you think you should have the ability to alert the authorities that would begin the process of a red flag designation?
Well,
Because I have real reservations for that as an ex-educator. Well, I like to still think I'm educating. But, I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, because, I mean, you've had students, I've had students that were odd. They were not the norm. They dressed oddly. They maybe dyed their hair and their nails black and all this other stuff. And should I have the ability to say, that guy looks like a threat to me, and this whole process begins that may end up going nowhere or tagging this boy unfairly
right.
as a threat? I mean, we've just profiled him and we just violated his 14th Amendment rights.
Sure.
Do you think the teacher should be a conduit for that?
I think that's a legitimate concern because I do think that what you want to avoid, the vast majority of people that are diagnosed with some kind of mental illness are not violent. They aren't going to be committing mass violence. And you don't want to end up stigmatizing a whole group of people based on that. So I think there is some cause for concern with red flag laws. I think, like I said, if you have, some of these you already mentioned, but if you have, domestic violence, I think they need to close the boyfriend loophole also. Just, you know what that is, right? That needs to be closed. Cruelty to animals, any violent conviction should lead to
abusing their parents or their elders. That happens a lot.
Yeah. Elder abuse, parent, any of these things should be part of it. As far as a teacher flagging a student just because they're kind of aberrant in some way, I think you would have to craft it very carefully to where it's not just the kid looks weird or dresses weird, whatever that means these days, because I don't, But,
you have a broader definition.
Yeah, that stuff doesn't really faze me. But, when there's a clear warning sign that they're actually posting about committing harm or having, these fantasies that they can't shake of committing these terrible acts and...
Well,
I mean, there are some things that are quite obvious that should be,
I guess so,
attended to.
I would just be afraid that you have a teacher that says, here comes some flamboyant young man, and whatever, yeah, or LGBTQ, and we don't want those in our school, so they flag him or her as a threat.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of that coming down the pike anyway.
Yeah, or
legislatively.
Or you have a situation where this young man. Maybe just a little bit odd, or he laughs in at appropriate jokes, and you look on his folder and he has an Anthrax rock and roll band drawn all over his folders. Half the ninth grade boys would probably be put in that situation because, when you're 14, you think that's neat. But I don't think that necessarily are red flaggable, but I just have real concerns about red flag laws. But my basic concern is not just what we're talking about here, but even the states that have them, it takes a level of involvement that these boys didn't have in the first place.
Yeah.
These boys didn't have this level of involvement. They wouldn't have been red flagged because no one took the time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the best way to put it is we need to have a system in which we could have somebody inspected, I guess, and checked out by a professional, not by, you and me eyeballing this kid, and our experience, whatever else.
Yeah, there'd have to be layers of accountability and oversight on it.
And then at a certain point, if they're deemed not a threat, then that doesn't go any further than that, and we don't red flag him just because he went through a process and was determined by a professional, no, this kid's not a threat. Then end of conversation, right? But we need to have, like we mentioned before, we need to have those levels of accountability, those steps, and it's going to cost money.
Yes.
And kind of on a side note here, I think the Democrats nominated the wrong man for governor. McConaughey was much more in line with more. Yeah.
I didn't catch. I caught just clips of his remarks.
I saw it on the news, and then went back to YouTube and caught the whole thing. And and he's very well spoken, and a lot of people just roll their eyes. Oh, Matthew McConaughey, and Hollywood actor. He's one of the few actors I don't get annoyed with when he's talking about public issues. But I just thought. I think he had an understanding that something has to be done, but there are limits to how far things can be done. But anyway, what I'd like to do here is run through the ads real quick, and then I'll let you have the last word. Whatever you want to say. I usually let the guests end the show because they can hear me anytime. Thank you, Daniel, across at Burleson, 317 Southwest Wilshire. Hope you're doing well. Hope you and Amber, the kids, well. They're down, I believe, right now in Guatemala. Eagles Nest Orphanage. There's a guy that graduated 2-3 years before you, Terry McConnell. You know him? You probably maybe have gone to school with his brothers. Anyway, they're down there, and they work at that orphanage, and they're doing God's work, certainly. So CrossFit Burleson, 317 Southwest Wilshire. Check them out if you want to work out. Also, thank you to Shandy. You want to move here, you better talk to her because, a lot of these houses not only are going before they go on the market, but they are going for much more than what they're being asked for. So you need somebody to help you negotiate that. Also with Rex over at the Russell Wealth Group and myfinancialbox.com, help you through these turbulent economic times. I mean, the market's going up, it's going down. He'll help you, hold your hand, give you a Kleenex, dry your tears, whatever. All right. Also, thank you to Gayla, Southern Gem. She's right now in Vegas, but my wife is working there right now. If you want to go by and say, hey, go by and check out the jewelry, check out the services. You'll like it there. Top floor of the Windmiller Building. Also, we have Hot Works. Taylor, you recommend Hot Works, but you recommend be prepared, right?
Yeah, be prepared.
For a real workout.
For the works. You got to be prepared for the works part of it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But it's a good, safe environment. You can go there at 3 a.m. if you have the code, but when I go visit, they let me in, so you don't have bums just walking in the door. So it's a good place to do it. It's over on 731 on the Commons by the theater and Kroger. Also, thank you to Mandy Harden, the Creative Concepts. You're looking for promotional items, talk to her, check out her webpage, and she can coffee cups, hats, pins, shirts, banners. Taylor used her too, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and she did
Miracle
a great job.
Worker.
Miracle Worker, okay. Thank you to Otto at our place. I'll see you tomorrow. And it's always a good meal, good deal. So you need to take Frances. I kind of halfway expect to see her here. She's still doing that newsletter kind of thing.
She had to take a week off because we were out of town this weekend, so she'll be sending it out.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
What's it going to be about?
I think this week is more about our animals.
Okay. Well, so, how old is she?
She's 8.
Well, there you go. She probably has your literary bent. Thank you to Chris over at Wild Cigar. Get you a smoke, get you a decent drink. Do your business there. They have a conference room if you want to use it. They have all the facilities you need. So check out Chris at Cigar and Culture. Thank you to Antonio. Thank you for listening, Antonio. I hope you enjoyed the show as best you can. ProactivePaymentSolutions.com. Contact him, and he'll help you with your online and point of sales operations. And like I said, tomorrow we're going to have Tiffany Griffin and showing us the new magazine, and we're going to be talking about things that have been going on with Tiffany Griffin. So you want to tune in for that. We're going to have an interesting conversation, no doubt. So we'll see y'all. Well, wait a minute. I want to give you the last word.
Oh, man.
You just kind of sum up what you think.
Pressure's on. Well, I mean, I go back to what I think ought to happen, which is I don't think whatever need someone might claim for having one of these weapons, I don't think the trade-off is worth it, as we're seeing these incidents unfold with mind-numbing frequency. But aside from that, I think we need to think about what we do with a society where there are more guns than people, how we shift attitudes around guns, and how we shift attitudes around taking care of the whole person in our society. We talked a lot this past hour about mental health care. I think health care in general and making it available, affordable for everyone could go a hugely long way toward addressing not only this problem, but many other systemic problems that we face. So I would like to see action in that regard, no doubt.
Well, maybe they'll have you on again. We can talk about those things. We can, and I could say, no, laissez-faire. And you say, no, command society, or whatever you would say. I don't know. But anyway, I'd like to have you on again.
Sure, this was fun.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people think it's going to be either nervous or whatever. We're very relaxed here in the neighborhood. But I appreciate it, Seth.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me on.
All right, and we'll see y'all tomorrow.